Morning rain drummed against the cafe's awning on Royal Street, blending the scent of wet asphalt with the bitter aroma of chicory. Inside, there was the usual rush, clinking cups, murmuring voices, the hiss of steaming milk. Amy Hayes stood in line, clutching her umbrella, trying to breathe evenly. Her first day at Bayou Press, and she was already late. Her chest felt tight, not from caffeine withdrawal, but from nerves. The line inched forward. She checked her watch, then the barista struggling to keep up, when suddenly the door opened, letting in a rush of damp air, and a man in a dark tailored coat. He didn't glance at anyone, just walked straight to the counter. Every movement calm, deliberate. People around her went still, as if a silent signal had passed through the room. The barista froze mid-pour, cup in hand. And that's when Amy, exhausted, anxious, and barely awake, snapped. "Hey! There's a line. You're not the only one who needs coffee." The silence fell like shattering glass. Even the espresso machine seemed to stop hissing. The man turned slowly. Tall. Composed. With a heavy gaze and a slow, almost lazy smile. His coat was perfectly cut, definitely not bought in this city. A touch of gray at his temples gave him an air of dangerous elegance. His eyes met hers, dark, assessing, unreadable. Someone behind her whispered, "That's Rizzi. Leo Rizzi." The name sliced through the air like thunder before a storm. Even the barista stepped back. Leo Rizzi, heir to one of New Orleans' oldest families, the kind people whispered about more than spoke of, looked at Amy for a moment longer than he should have. Then, instead of anger, his mouth curved slightly. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll wait." He stepped behind her in line. The cafe exhaled, the tension breaking. Everyone went back to their conversations as if nothing had happened. Everyone except Amy, who could feel her heart hammering. She stepped forward, keeping her eyes fixed on the counter. But the weight of his gaze pressed against her back. Her fingers trembled as she took her cup of latte. She had just told off the man they called the boss of the bayou. By noon, the rain had turned into a thick mist, and the streets of New Orleans smelled of paper, damp stone, and gasoline. Amy had almost recovered from that morning's disaster, that absurd moment when she'd yelled at a local legend about cutting in line. Almost. She kept telling herself that the man would never appear in her life again. It was just a random encounter, strange, embarrassing, already forgotten. But fate, it seemed, smiled in the same direction he did. The publishing house smelled of ink and stale coffee. The boardroom buzzed quietly as editors, executives, and lawyers took their places. Amy, the youngest and newest among them, sat near the wall with a notebook balanced on her knees, the invisible observer, exactly where she belonged. "The new investor will be here any minute," said the director. "A very influential man. Doesn't like small talk." The door opened. And just like that morning in the cafe, silence fell like a dropped curtain. He walked in, the same man, the same quiet power. That faint trace of tobacco and leather that seemed to cling to him. Leo Rizzi. He paused at the head of the table, removing his gloves slowly, almost ceremonially. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said. "Please, don't get up." Amy felt the blood drain from her face. The room seemed to shrink until there was only him, and that deliberate glance sweeping across the table before stopping on her. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Not many people make me wait, Miss Hayes." Someone coughed. Others exchanged puzzled looks, not understanding the weight of the words. Amy wished she could vanish, dissolve into the wallpaper. "We've met," he added after a moment. This morning was interesting. The editor-in-chief forced a smile. Perfect. Then our new hire is already making an impression. Awkward laughter rippled through the room, too loud, too forced. Amy nodded stiffly, pretending to jot something in her notebook, while every nerve in her body screamed under the weight of his presence. The air itself felt heavier around him, as if gravity had its own hierarchy. Rizzi took the head seat. My involvement is purely financial, he said, his tone calm but unyielding. Still, I value words. The right words. I don't invest in people who speak without meaning. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. Every sentence drew invisible lines, defining who held control in this room. And Amy, somewhere beyond those lines, felt microscopic. When the meeting ended, chairs scraped back, papers rustled. She tried to slip away unnoticed. Miss Hayes. Her name stopped her cold. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried command. She turned. Do you often speak your mind? He asked quietly, without thinking who might not like it. His lips barely moved, but something in his eyes flickered. Only when it's about fairness, she said, lifting her chin. He gave a short, almost soundless laugh. Good answer. He leaned closer, close enough that she caught his scent, dark, woody, with a sharp undertone of danger. Don't do that with others, Miss Hayes. They might not appreciate it. And you? She asked. Did you? He studied her for a long, charged moment. I'm not used to being challenged, he said. But sometimes it's useful to be reminded the world can still surprise me. Then, straightening, his voice returned to its usual coolness. Until next time. I hope there won't be one, she muttered, and only realized she'd said it aloud when his smile deepened faintly, almost imperceptibly. Behind him, the window reflected a strip of gray sky and the fine silver thread of rain, as if the whole city were quietly listening. Amy stood frozen, clutching her folder to her chest. Her heart beat too fast, too loud, as though electricity, not blood, ran through her veins. And she knew, with frightening clarity, that she had just opened a door she couldn't close again. By late evening, the rain had slowed to a silver drizzle. The workday should have ended hours ago, yet Amy was still at her desk, trying to lose herself in manuscripts that refused to hold her attention. Her inbox chimed. Mr. Rizzi requests your presence for a brief follow-up discussion. 8 p.m. Le Pavilion. Sent not by him, but by his assistant. A business dinner, she told herself. Nothing else. But her pulse disagreed. At 8, she stood under the golden awning of Le Pavilion, the city glowing wet and restless around her. Inside, chandeliers reflected in 1,000 drops of rain clinging to the windows. The maitre d' greeted her by name, as if she had been expected all along. Leo Rizzi rose when she approached. The candlelight caught on his cuff links, the dark sheen of his suit. Miss Hayes, he said, voice low enough to make the sound of her name feel private. I appreciate your time. I assumed this was about the publishing house, she replied, taking the seat opposite. In part, he said, a hint of amusement in his eyes. I wanted to hear what you think the company lacks. For the first few minutes he listened intently, asking precise, intelligent questions, too precise for someone who claimed to be only a financial partner. She noticed the way he watched people, not their faces, but the moments they hesitated. When she mentioned that Bayou Press had lost its identity chasing trends, he smiled faintly, as if confirming a theory. You speak as though you're afraid of being ordinary, he said. Isn't everyone? The waiter appeared with Bordeaux and soft-shell crab. Conversation paused, filled instead by the low hum of jazz from the corner. When the waiter left, Leo leaned back, studying her. You remind me of someone who used to believe words could fix anything. And what changed his mind? He took a slow sip of wine. Reality. Thunder rumbled outside. Amy's fork hovered halfway to her mouth. She could have ended the evening there, thank him politely, flee into the rain, but something in his tone held her. There was a weariness beneath the polish, a man fighting ghosts too heavy for champagne and candlelight. She set her fork down. You didn't invite me here just for strategy talk, did you? No, his answer was immediate, unflinching. I wanted to see if you'd still look at me the same way you did this morning. How's that? Like you weren't afraid. The words landed softly, but they struck something deep. Fear had been all she'd felt since he'd walked into her life, but mixed with it now was a dangerous curiosity. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. The candlelight threw narrow shadows across his face. My family built its empire on control, he said quietly. On the idea that order can protect you. But order becomes a cage. And cages, he paused, searching her eyes, don't suit either of us. For a moment neither of them moved. The jazz faded, replaced by the distant rhythm of rain against glass. Amy realized her heartbeat had synchronized with it. You made me wait once, Leo said, his voice barely above a whisper. Now I find myself wondering what else I'd wait for. The confession hung between them, fragile as glass. Amy's breath caught. She wanted to say something sharp, sensible, something that would pull her back to safety, but the words wouldn't come. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the river through the window, black water coiling around the city like something alive. Leo stood first, tossing a few bills onto the table. Let me walk you out. They stepped beneath the awning. The street smelled of rain and night jasmine, reflections of neon signs shimmered across the wet pavement. He looked down at her, and for the first time the composure in his eyes faltered, replaced by something almost human, tired, honest. Be careful, Amy, he said. Of what? Of how deep the bayou runs. He turned and walked into the rain, coat darkening with every drop until he dissolved into the silver mist. Amy stood there, the echo of jazz spilling from the doorway behind her. The puddles on the street rippled with light, swallowing his reflection until nothing remained. And she finally understood what he meant. The bayou didn't drown you, it lured you, slow, quiet, patient, until you forgot to swim back. 2 nights later, the rain returned. Not the fierce kind that tore through the streets, but a steady whisper, the sort that filled empty rooms with thought. Amy sat at her window, staring at the blurred lights along Magazine Street. She hadn't slept well since the dinner. Be careful how deep the bayou runs. The words had settled under her skin, echoing when the world went quiet. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then she answered. Amy, came that calm, unmistakable voice. Did I wake you? No, she lied. Good. I need to talk. Meet me outside. When she looked down from the window, he was already there, standing beside a dark car, coat unbuttoned, rain glistening on his shoulders like mercury. He didn't move, didn't wave. Just waited. The ride was silent at first. City lights faded into shadows as they crossed toward the river. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere private. It's time you knew who you're dealing with. They stopped before a villa on the edge of the quarter, part office, part hideaway, its facade lit only by a single lantern. Inside smelled of cedar and old paper, the air warm from a low fire. A whiskey decanter waited on a small table. He poured 2 glasses. To honesty. She arched a brow. Is that what this is? For me, it's practice, he said quietly. I don't get many chances. He sat across from her, elbows on his knees, gaze fixed on the fire. For the first time, Leo Rizzi looked like a man who had carried too much for too long. You once said I was trying to change something, he began. You were right. His fingers turned the glass slowly. My mother wanted out. Away from the business, the alliances, the kind of loyalty that kills people slowly. My father called it betrayal. He cut her off, money, protection, name. In our world, that's a death sentence. She lasted 2 years. Amy didn't move. The words landed like stones dropped into deep water. You think she'd forgive you? No, he said. But I can make sure the same rules don't bury anyone else. The fire cracked, gold flickering across his face. When my father died, he left me a kingdom of debts and ghosts. I've spent years trying to turn it clean, real businesses, legal fronts. But people who live off dirt don't want clean hands. They keep pulling me back. He looked up then, eyes dark and unguarded. You should walk away. People have started asking questions about you. Your family? Some. Some aren't family anymore. She studied him in the firelight, trying to read what kind of danger he wasn't saying out loud. Why tell me this? He hesitated, then. Because you looked at me like I was human. No one does that anymore. Not even the ones who claim they love me. For a moment neither spoke. Rain tapped against the shutters, soft and steady. Amy's throat felt dry. She knew she should leave. Instead she said, You don't scare me. You should, he answered. But that's what scares me instead. He rose, pacing once before the window. Outside, the river flashed silver in the stormlight. I can protect you, he said, voice rougher now, but I can't promise you'll be safe. There's a difference. And if I stay? Then you stop being a bystander in my story. She stood too. The space between them hummed with something neither of them named. For a heartbeat, she thought he might touch her. Instead he simply looked at her, eyes unreadable. You're already in deeper than you think, he said. Amy turned toward the door. Rain seeped through the crack of light outside. Behind her, the fire snapped, casting shadows like bars across the floor. For a moment she didn't move, caught between safety and something dangerously close to truth. Then she opened the door. You made me wait once, he said behind her. Don't make me regret it. She didn't answer. The rain swallowed her as she stepped into the night, the sound of the door closing behind her louder than thunder. Out on the street, she drew a shaky breath. The city smelled of smoke and wet magnolia. Every instinct told her to run, to forget him, but her heart beat in time with the storm. You can leave a house, she thought, but not a confession. And somewhere behind those dark windows, Leo Rizzi watched the rain slide down the glass, not as the boss of the bayou, but as a man who had finally told the truth and wished, for once, he hadn't. The night of the gala carried the kind of elegance that made people whisper rather than talk. Crystal light, low jazz, champagne poured in quiet rhythm. The city's old money mingled with its newer ambitions, and the publishing house's small delegation stood near the back, trying not to look out of place. Amy Hayes adjusted her name badge, balancing a flute of champagne she didn't intend to drink. It was her first appearance at such an event, and she knew everyone was watching, judging. Across the room, reporters circled the bar. Near the stage, authors clustered around donors, laughing too loudly. Then came the announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight's literary panel, The Future of American Voices. Applause rippled through the room. Amy followed her colleagues to the small stage. Beside her sat Declan Burke, the famous critic whose smirk could curdle milk, and a few others from the old guard. The host smiled. Miss Hayes, as our youngest editor, tell us, what defines a modern voice? Amy leaned toward the microphone. Honesty, she said simply. Stories that stop apologizing for existing. Declan chuckled into his wine. How poetic. But honesty doesn't sell. Structure does. Editors should remember they're not poets. Amy didn't flinch. Maybe that's the problem. You think structure sells. I think connection does. Murmurs in the audience. The host shifted nervously. Declan leaned closer, voice dry as ash. Charming idealism. Remind me, how many bestsellers have you produced? 2 in print, 4 in contract, Amy said. And I didn't have to condescend to the authors. Soft laughter ran through the crowd. Declan's jaw tightened. I admire your enthusiasm, he said. But youth mistakes noise for progress. Amy's eyes met his. And age mistakes habit for wisdom. Before the host could step in, another voice joined, low, smooth, unmistakable. In my world, it said, we don't interrupt people who make sense. The audience turned. Leo Rizzi stood near the edge of the platform, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. He hadn't raised his voice, but the words carried easily. The air shifted. Declan forced a laugh. I didn't realize the financial backer had joined the panel. I didn't, Leo replied calmly. Just couldn't ignore a man mistaking volume for insight. A hush rippled through the room. The host mumbled something about spirited debate, but no one heard him. Leo's gaze slid toward Amy, brief, grounding. Please, he said, continue your thought. Amy drew a breath. Her pulse was wild, but her tone stayed steady. We've built a market that celebrates recycled stories and calls it tradition, she said. Maybe it's time to stop preserving dust. The applause came cautious at first, then genuine. Even the donors seemed to listen. Declan's smirk faltered. Clever sound bite, he muttered. We'll see if it holds when sales drop. Leo's voice was soft. Sales drop when the product is boring. That silenced him completely. Later, after the speeches and polite clapping, Amy found Leo near the balcony overlooking the garden. The rain had started again, faint and rhythmic. He stood apart from the crowd, watching the reflections ripple in the marble floor. You didn't have to defend me, she said quietly. I didn't, he answered. I wanted to. That was risky. You humiliated him in front of everyone. He humiliated himself. I just gave the room permission to notice. Amy managed a small smile. You know how to use silence better than anyone I've met. That's how people survive in my family, he said. They learn when not to speak. She studied him, the perfect suit, the measured calm, the faint shadow beneath his eyes. You don't really belong here either, do you? He looked out at the rain. Belonging's overrated. Control lasts longer. For a moment they stood without speaking, the city's sounds muffled by the glass. Then he turned to her. You handled yourself well tonight. I spoke my mind. Again. His mouth curved faintly. I noticed. A waiter passed, Leo took 2 glasses of wine, handed one to her. People here, he said, smile with their mouths and judge with their checkbooks. But they'll remember you. You didn't bend. I'm not sure that's a good thing, she murmured. He glanced at her, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. It is for me. Before she could answer, someone called her name, the PR director, waving her over to meet a donor. Amy turned back once more, but Leo had already stepped away into the crowd, swallowed by tuxedos and glitter. She finished the introductions on autopilot, reciting numbers, smiling where required. When she finally escaped to the empty corridor, he was waiting near the exit, hands in his pockets again, calm as ever. They're going to come after you for that speech, he said. I know. You'll need allies. I'll manage. He studied her for a moment, then said, You keep saying that like it's not my problem. It isn't, she said. Not yet, he replied, voice low. But it will be. The doors opened to the night. Rain shimmered against the pavement like mercury. Amy stepped out first, he followed a moment later, silent, the distance between them filled with something neither of them dared name. She glanced back. He was watching her again, expression unreadable under the glow of streetlight. For a second, she thought of what he'd said about silence, and realized that sometimes, silence wasn't safety. It was a promise. Morning smelled of chicory and wet canvas again. The same cafe, the same line of half-awake people waiting for warmth in paper cups. The rain tapped softly on the awning, the city breathing in rhythm with it. Amy stood in line, just like that first morning, calm, composed, pretending she wasn't listening for a doorbell. When it finally rang, she already knew. The man who entered wore the same dark coat. The barista froze mid-motion, nearly dropping a cup. Mr. Rizzi, you don't have to wait. Leo's gaze found hers through the crowd. I'll wait, he said quietly. The room exhaled. People turned away, pretending not to watch. He stepped behind her, no guards, no distance, only a man in line. Amy turned, smiling. Took you long enough. He nodded. I'm learning. Your order, Miss Hayes, the barista asked. Chicory latte. No syrup. And you, sir? The same, Leo said. Best way to learn is to repeat. Their order numbers appeared side by side on the screen, 27 and 28. How've you been? He asked. Working. Trying not to start fights. That's disappointing, he said. You're good at them. She laughed softly. The sound seemed to surprise him. The barista placed 2 cups on the counter. Leo slid hers toward her, careful not to touch more than cardboard. Thank you, she said. Not for the coffee, he replied. They moved to a table by the window. Rain streaked down the glass, jazz hummed low in the background. You know what they're saying? She asked. That I came without guards. And that you're waiting in line. He smiled faintly. Small miracles. You've changed, she said. I'm trying, he answered. You made it sound simple. It isn't. I noticed. For a moment neither spoke. The silence between them felt lighter than it used to, not a wall, but a pause that knew what came next. On the counter, someone dropped change. Among the coins lay a small bronze token with a serpent carved in a circle. Amy reached toward it, but Leo stopped her hand. Don't, he murmured. Old message. From whom? He looked at the token, jaw tightening. People who liked the old rules better. Amy's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Your turn. At noon. She frowned, showed him the screen. He read it once, face unreadable. So they're speaking through you now. Efficient. What do we do? He wrapped the token in a napkin, pocketed it. We wait. Like you taught me. They stood side by side, cups in hand, looking out at the street. Rain turned to mist. People passed by, whispering, recognizing him. The man everyone feared, standing still, because she was beside him. You know what this means? Amy said quietly. That they'll come, Leo answered. And you'll wait? For as long as you tell me to. Her reflection met his in the glass, two outlines, equal, steady. The bell above the door chimed again. A courier left a small envelope with her name. Inside lay a red thread, tied into a ring. Leo's expression darkened. Another threat, she asked. No, he said. A promise. She tucked the thread into her pocket. Outside, the rain faded to a silver mist. They stepped into it together, shoulder to shoulder. The cafe door closed behind them, the bell echoing once, clear, final. And the city, watching, understood. The man once feared by all now waited his turn. And he waited for her.